good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Diane's usually here by now, but she's the program introducer, but I'll sub for her since I'm going to be up here anyway. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at an incident that happened 140 years ago yesterday. So yesterday was the 140th anniversary of this very sad incident in Lincoln's history, and we'll take a pretty thorough look at it and understand what was going on in the minds of people in the county while this was all transpiring. Hi, Tom. The young lady you see there, that is from an actual photograph. Back in the 1880s, they did not have the wherewithal to put photographs in the newspapers, so they took their photographs and sent them to the press works in New York City, where they made these etchings that they could produce pictures and papers. But that was an actual photograph it was taken from. And you'll see more of those as we go through the program tonight. Zura was not from Lincoln, not from Logan County. She was born in Missouri, and that was her first name, Missouri. Oh. But if you have ever been around Missourians, true Missourians, it's Zura. So that's how she got her nickname of Zura. She worked as a seamstress. She was a pretty good seamstress. She was also a domestic in the house of Orrin Carpenter, who figures highly in this little drama. Zura came to work there because she was living with a married sister here in Lincoln. And the sister eventually moved on to the Dakotas, so that there's no family left from the Burnses, although that Burns name's probably still around, but not from this family. There are no Carpenters around from that family. There are Carpenter names, you probably know some, but not from that family. So we're talking about people that had no roots here and had no family here, and they still don't exist here. But early on the Monday morning of October 15th, 1883, Mrs. Patrick DeWitt was making her way to their piece of farm ground that was north of town. And I'll show you a map in a minute where that's located. And she came across Zura's body that Monday morning, 8-ish or so. Well, you know what, about the same time of year, so it would have been after light on about the same time we get it right now. So she came across the body, and of course, she screamed. That brought other people, and then they went off and told the sheriff, told the coroner, and the coroner called a couple of doctors to come out to the scene to take a look and start their investigation. So they all got to the same place and started working on this. At the moment, they don't know who it is. It's just a girl that's been murdered. That's all they know. And they have the sheriff and the coroner come out. They turn the body over, find that the girl's throat has been cut. Yeah. Both carotid arteries, the larynx. It's a pretty deep cut. And and she bled out right there at the scene. She also was found to have injuries to her head. She'd been hit with a blunt instrument, and which rendered her unconscious, which allowed the murderer to do the cutting. And they moved the body once they got the scene taken a look at. By that time, a lot of people had walked through the scene, and they had footprints all over the place, and hard to tell whose was whose and what. So we have all of that going on at the same time. But that's where the investigation starts into this incident. The two doctors, well, let's look at the murder scene first. This is a map that was drawn up for the court purposes by the assistant circuit clerk, Edward Rautenberg, who is a great granduncle of mine. But here, let's find out where we are here. You see this roadway? That's Union Street. Right here it says Brainerd's Orchard. Do you know where the Brainerd Mansion is? Yeah. We know it probably as Edwards, the Edwards Mansion. That was the most recent owner anyway. This road is 17th Street. What do we call 17th Street now? Woodlawn Road. So we're at that very busy intersection. But out there at that time, X, this is the coding that Edward put on these things. But X is an 80-acre cornfield. Each of these plots is 10 acres. And then there's 2 lanes here that go between. I always thought this was a street name here, but all it says is west. And then got north, east, and south. But the N here is the DeWitt patch, and that's where Mrs. DeWitt was going when she came across the body. Other things were identified. This is the Mundy place here on the corner. E was missing out of the list. G is another cornfield. H is another cornfield. So not much out there except corn and farm ground. But where you see the B is where the body, Miss Burns, whatever the B stands for, that's it. That's where she was found. Just north of 17th Street and west of Union Street. Now there's no scale here, so I have no idea how far out Woodlawn Road that was. Could be where the football field was. It could be where Grand Avenue is. I don't know. There just was no scale to help us identify that. But they took the body to the coroner's office. The doctors performed their autopsy, found that the girl was 4 months pregnant. Oh. So he decided he better get a jury going, a coroner's jury, and he did that. But before they did that, they had this girl on display in his office. By that time, she'd been cleaned up, the cut had been sutured, and all that sort of stuff, so people could come in and identify her. That's what the purpose of that was. So they paraded in all day to identify her. One young man came through. He was what we would call a bus driver. He would sit at the railroad stations, and he would pick up people and take them to the various hotels in town. And Zura had come in on the Peoria, Decatur, Evanston route, and she took that bus from there to the Lincoln House on that particular Saturday when she came into town. That was the 13th. But she was identified by him as coming into town on Saturday morning. And somebody said, well, she looks like a girl that's been working for the carpenters. She's working as a domestic, she's doing sewing for them. So they got hold of Mrs. Carpenter, Helen, and the two daughters, Gertie and Fanny, and they all came down and identified that this was Zura Burns. Later on, Orrin came in because he was at work, and you'll see where he worked here pretty soon. But that was the scene of the murder. They could determine that it happened there because all the blood was still there. You know, she hadn't bled out before she was taken there. Okay, so the sheriff at that time was William Wendell. The coroner was John T. Boyden, who was an undertaker here in town. And the two doctors that did the autopsy were Dr. L.L. Leeds, who was a rather prominent doctor around, and Dr. Catherine Miller, our only female doctor. And she's the one that discovered the fetus and identified the age on that fetus, between 4 and 5 months. So she was on display. They found out her name. Her father was, her family was living in St. Elmo, so they started contacting the family. The father was contacted, and he came up right away. Zura's mother had died in 1869, so there was stepmother, Margaret Burns. Zach Burns was a brother, and he was out in Kansas doing telegraphy work, and he came back. And of course, the sister, Mrs. William Dukes, and she had already moved to the Dakotas and came back to attend all these hearings and stuff. So the coroner pulled a jury together, and the first 6 guys on here, including Dustin and Nicholson, were the original selection. Now I know Nicholson was on the grand jury, so he probably opted out of this for that reason, and they never explained why Dustin dropped off. And then they picked up Samuel Stern and T.W. Kenyon. But usually these are business people in town. They're easy to get to. They can grab them off the street and pull them into these coroner juries. Excuse me. Well, the sheriff and started pulling in everybody that thought they had some kind of information in this case. They ended up interviewing more than 60 people. And everything was all circumstantial. There's no definite link to anybody at this time, although Carpenter's name came up more often. The girl worked in the house. He took her home after work. You know, he just happened to be the most numerous identified person. So they took from the 17th, I think is when it started, to the 1st of November to do all this investigating. And of course the investigation continued through the inquest, after the inquest, because at the end of the inquest, I'll get to that page. Here's what the verdict said. In the matter of the inquisition of the body of Missouri Burns, deceased held at Lincoln, Illinois from October 17th to November 1st, we, the undersigned jurors, sworn to inquire of the death of Missouri Burns, on oath do find that she came to her death by means of a wound in the throat produced by some sharp instrument in the hands of some person or persons to the jury unknown. It was circumstantial evidence, so they can't say that Carpenter should go to the grand jury because he's the guy that did it. So we have all that circumstantial evidence to work with. Now, some things that were going on around all of this. The state's attorney at the time was Randolph Forrest. He was out of town when this incident happened, and he was not back when they needed a prosecutor. So E.D. Blinn stepped into that role until Forrest could get back. Now, I lost my notes. Two things we need to point out here. There was a lot of pressure on the prosecution to get a guilty verdict. One is the murder history for Logan County. From the time the county was formed in 1839 until 1883, there had been 38 murders in the county.
Wow, county. Wow,
It's worse than
It's a rough time to be around. There was only one conviction out of all 38 of those cases.
Oh my goodness.
So the people were getting upset, to say the least, that it was continuing to happen. And the most recent murder prior to this happened in August of 1882 over at Mount Pulaski. And it was a triple murder. A farmer by the name of Charles McMahon and his two farm workers, Robert Matheny and John Carlock, were all killed by having their throats cut. You know. Now, I knew about this case before, so I kind of said, well, there's a connection there. Tom?
By who?
We don't know.
Oh, okay.
Not at this time.
Oh, okay.
They didn't solve that case until later in 1884 after the Zura Burns
Oh, okay.
trial took place. So, but it was not the same. Well, it could have been because they didn't figure out who did this one. But there was a lot of pressure on the prosecution for a conviction. And the people of Logan County were up in arms. They wanted a conviction. They wanted somebody to pay for this. And when you get in that situation, people take shortcuts, play tricks or whatever, and they make mistakes. Okay, let's look at the
Wasn't a witness.
inquest. We got the judge in this. Is actually a justice of peace. Everything started with a justice of peace at that time. Justice of peace was Jacob T. Rudolph, the coroner John T. Boyden, Sheriff William Wendell, State's Attorney Randolph B. Forrest, and he was assisted by Edward Blinn. So at the inquest, the defense, Carpenter's attorneys, he could see what was coming down the road. He already knew that he was going to be the prime suspect here. So he got in contact with his attorneys, Timothy Beach, Joseph Hodnett. They were partners, and they told him to shut up. Don't talk to anybody about anything dealing with this case. And they brought in Edmund Lynch because he's a good speaker, good thinker, and could be a big help to them. The post-mortem, of course, was done by Dr. Leeds and Dr. Miller, and we had over 60 witnesses. And these witnesses came out of the woodwork just because they wanted to be part of something famous, I guess. Because they were not anywhere near. They didn't. The thing is that the doctors determined that the murder took place between midnight of Sunday night and 3 o'clock Monday morning. So it was a very short window there. So they had to try to place the suspects in that window with her. So they never did for any of them. The county put up a $1,000 reward for, like they do nowadays, for information leading to the arrest of. So we've got this $1,000, and then there were a couple others that came up and made a total about $1,500.
It's a lot of
So
money.
all the private detectives started coming out of the woodwork. And most of them were not very good. Two of them used clairvoyance to get their information. So it was sometimes laughable reading these accounts of these detectives. The one guy, though, that was working for the prosecution was Press Butler. He seemed to have more on the ball than others, although he felt the pressure too of getting somewhere quickly. So he searched. Let me show you Press. That's Press Butler. He went after the coroner's jury said, we don't know who did it. It's done, but we don't know who did it. He went to Carpenter's place of work. His buggy was sitting there. He started checking out the buggy, found some hairpins. That's a big clue, right? Well, his mother lives with him, rides in the buggy. His wife lives with him, he rides in the buggy. His daughters live with him, and they all ride in the buggy. And then the daughters use it for help for carting their friends around. So you got multiple females in and out of that buggy. And he kept looking more and more and more, and finally looked at the whip and the reins, and he saw a little stain on one of them. And he said, I think that's blood. Well, he took that information to Judge Rudolph. Judge Rudolph says, okay, arrest him. So they went to his place of business, got him, took him to jail. At the time of that, the jail was in that block there where the post office is. So it's long gone, of course. There are two other locations that are. One of them is the Eston Carpenter elevator. That plays an important part in this whole thing. Let me get my little pointer. Well, there it is. Okay. This street is named Chicago Street. Isn't that a coincidence? Okay, where'd my spot go? There it is. This street is Broadway. That's not far from here, is it? So this corner right here is the property right there, just across the street. So that's where that elevator sat. What plays a critical role here is the office right here. This is where Carpenter does all of his work. And at the time, he was buying out a partner in the elevator in Hartsburg. Martling. Martling was very sick, dying. I think he died before they got very far into this. But he would spend his nights in that office late, going through the books, trying to divide up what goes to the Martling family and what's his. So he'd spend a lot of nights doing that. The Friday of the incident, that would have been the 12th, he was up there late. That Saturday of the 13th, he was up there real late. And not real late. He was home by 10 o'clock or so. All the family members testified to that. And he had been up to Hartsburg on Friday, worked on the books with the guy that ran the place. He said, I'll be back on Monday and we'll finish this up. So he did that. He went out on Monday before the discovery of the body, and he was headed for Hartsburg. And somebody said, well, I saw him going to Hartsburg. So he's getting out of town. So we're looking at the lot right across the street from us. And apparently on that Saturday when he was working there, Zura went to see him in that office and talked to him about her sister. She didn't know exactly where she went, other than that she went to Dakota's, and he told her it was the Blunt area, Blunt area, Blunt, Dakota. And at that time, Dakota was a territory yet, hadn't been divided into 2 states, so it was a Dakota territory, and they were in and out of the Dakota territory. So, now if you were standing where this guy is standing right here, and you looked in this direction, well, that direction, this is what you would see. You would see the Lincoln House. Those are just catty corner from each other. And the Lincoln House is important because that is where Zura went when she came back from St. Elmo to talk to Carpenter. And he was to pay her a balance of some work that she had done. So he did all that, told her where the sister was. She went back to the motel. Of course, they got Carpenter in jail now because of suspected blood stains. The whip and the hairpins and the rings that seemed to have spots on them were sent to a specialist in Chicago to have it tested for blood. And negative. It was inconclusive for blood, as they say. We couldn't say it's not blood, it's just that it doesn't show blood. So now we get to the place where we still don't have anybody being bound over to the grand jury to be the prime suspect for this murder. And he is, Carpenter's in jail. And they've already had the coroner's jury. That's usually who does the moving on of suspects. And so they had a, what they call a preliminary hearing prior to the grand jury. And that was presided over by Judge Lyman Lacey, who was a well-known judge at the time. And he's from Mason City, but he was on the circuit. And he would sit on these hearings and the different cases in Lincoln and Mason County and Menard County. So we have the grand jury coming up. Lacey holds this preliminary hearing to hear. They go through the same 60 witnesses and the same information. So it's all still circumstantial. Nothing that says that he's done it. And Lacey's decision is that, it's all circumstantial, but the grand jury needs to take a look at this. So he's the one that bound him over to the grand jury, which was going to meet in January of 1884. The third Monday it started of January. Then the grand jury looked at this, and there was very little in the paper about the grand jury. And you can see in my second line there, it says, even in the newspaper, it said they kept this very secret. They didn't let people into it, apparently, so nothing leaked out of the grand jury. But they came back with a 5-count indictment against Carpenter. And they looks to me like they just repeat the same one 5 times, but there's a variation in each one to try to catch things they might have missed in the other one. But they came back with these 5 counts. And the jury was to, and Judge Lacey was uncomfortable, but you could read in his statement at the end of that hearing that he's under a lot of pressure too to try to get something done. So that's why he moved it on. Oops. Cool. Yeah, we'll go there. The trial, with the atmosphere in Logan County at the time, they knew he wasn't going to get a fair trial in Logan County. So they tried to negotiate with, I was afraid that was going to happen. It's a problem with being a speaker and a videographer too. You got to keep track of what's going on with your equipment. But the trial took place in Petersburg, Menard County. When they were negotiating, the prosecution suggested DeWitt County, but the sheriff and the county, or state's attorney for the county, Logan County, had already been over there and said, "We got our man, he's guilty. We got our man, he's guilty." And he kept repeating that over and over and over again. So it really affected the jury pool in both counties. So they got it changed to Petersburg, and that trial occurred in March of 1884. So we have some court officers. Now we have already met the Logan County people. We know the judge is going to be Lyman Lacey. He did come back and was selected for this trial. Coroner John Boyden, prosecuting attorneys Forrest and Glenn. And when attorneys go visit another county, they need to know the ins and outs. Who's the county clerk? How do they proceed? And who's the sheriff? And who's the deputies? And these extra attorneys are to help the actual attorneys negotiate through the system. So I got lucky on some things. The pictures of these guys just happen to be around. We have a nice file in the back that we use for Law Day. We get these pictures out and put them in the window at times. But this is Lyman Lacey. This is Judge Randolph Forrest, the state's attorney at the time, and they selected S.S. Knowles to be one of their assisting attorneys from Menard County. This is Edward Glenn. He's the only one we didn't have in the file back there. So I called Bill Bates, who's part of the family. Glenn Bates, Glenn came from somewhere, didn't it? But we have Mr. Glenn here. This picture's on their office wall in their establishment down there, and they snapped a photo of it and sent it to me. And they had another attorney, N.W. Branson that helped them in Menard County. Defense team is Timothy Beach. Now these photos might be later in life because all these guys were like in their 40s and 30s during this trial. And obviously Timothy was, and you might remember Timothy too, he was the judge who owned Postville Courthouse and sold it to Mr. Ford. And he died a week after he sold it. So he was pretty sick when that happened. Joseph Hodnett, and I found an article in the Decatur paper. So they called them pin pictures. They would describe the people. And the reporter said, and Mr. Hodnett is by far the handsomest of any of the attorneys in this case. But he's married and has 2 nice babies. So. And this Edmund Lynch. And then they used T.W. McNeely from Menard County to help them out. The jury was selected. They went through 88 potential jurors before they got to 12 that they're thinking of. The prime question asked by the defense lawyers was, would you convict on circumstantial evidence? And if they said no, then they said, that's my man. They wanted all these guys, all the jurors, to be not wanting to convict on circumstantial evidence. Okay, we
No women on the jury.
No.
But there's a women doctor. It's crazy.
all the testimony in the trial was identical to the testimony that was in all the other hearings and the coroner's jury. Nothing new had developed in that time from the murder on the 15th of October to the middle of March of 1884. They found nothing else that would bring anybody to the fore. And there were other suspects. Zura was engaged to the brother of her brother-in-law, one of the Dukes. Thomas Dukes was his name, and they were supposed to be married on the 30th of October, 1883.
Did you say how old she was?
She was 22 years old at the time. She was just a couple months short of 23. Then so the jury heard the same thing that everybody else heard. It was all still circumstantial. So Branson, all of the information didn't help them a bit. Now the verdict, and everybody knew the verdict before the trial even started. All the reporters said there's only one conclusion can come out of this. Because they covered enough murder cases, I guess, to know where this was headed. 2 weeks of testimony of more than 100 witnesses this time. Overnight deliberation, the first vote was 7-5 for acquittal. By midnight, that was 9 o'clock when they got, Forrest was a speaker and he loved to hear himself talk. He would speak for 4 and 5 hours.
Oh, gosh.
And he did that at the preliminary hearing. He did it in this trial for both opening and closing. So how do you, I don't fathom how they can do that. But it was entertainment for some of the people, I guess. So by midnight, the vote was 10-2 for acquittal. And they kept discussing it, and by 3 o'clock, it was unanimous acquittal, all 12. So the next morning, the judge opened court, and he got the verdict, not guilty. He dismissed the jury, he dismissed Carpenter, and usually that's the end of things. But not in this case. He had to run into the court of public opinion. At the time the jury, the verdict was given, there was a notice in all the papers in Lincoln that there was going to be a mass meeting at the courthouse in Logan County. Thousands of people, according to the newspapers, thousands of people showed up for that meeting. Of course, the courtroom wasn't very big. It was maybe 200 people could get in, maybe not even that, in that old courthouse. Not this one, it's the one prior to this. And everybody was up in arms. And they selected a committee of 7 to write some resolutions against Carpenter.
That guy Lynch.
The first of those, while they were doing that, when they were out of the room, coming up with these resolutions, they had speeches by the minister of Carpenter's church, who condemned him in public. Said, the guy's guilty. And just lambasted him while in front of all the people who wanted to hear that kind of thing. And then Mr. Burns, the father of the dead girl, who had been a Confederate soldier, had been wounded, was a heavy drinker, was really unstable, terribly unstable. And all they had to do was make suggestions to him about Carpenter, and he would act on it. You'll see that later. So they came back with the resolutions, and they had several. First one was, you must leave the county. And you must do it without delay.
Could they do that?
Yeah, right. How could they do that? It was a different world back then. So the resolutions were adopted by the group that was in the courtroom. And then they selected a committee of 50 to go to his house and present these resolutions to him. 50 people to deliver that one little piece of paper. Well, Carpenters hadn't come back yet from Petersburg. They hadn't made it back home yet. So it wasn't until after they got back that these other people got notified. The 50 assembled at the courthouse, and they walked to Carpenter's house, which means they walked all the way down Broadway Street. They walked up Union Street to 9th Street. They walked all the way down 9th Street to Carpenter's house. Selected one guy to walk up to give these resolutions to Carpenter. Carpenter met him on the porch. And the guy that was, all the names of these people are in the newspapers. I'm not going to give them tonight. I like living here myself. But the resolutions, he tried to give them he read the resolutions to Carpenter. And he tried to hand them to Carpenter. And Carpenter said, I do not recognize your authority in this matter. And he wouldn't accept them. So they laid him on the porch floor and left. One thing that group did do is they got everybody to agree there would be no violence. Everybody else would stay quiet while this one guy was doing all the talking. So there was no violence. And even prior to that, the sheriff had contacted the state to have the militia on hand because there was a lot of talk about lynching Carpenter. So the militia was available, but not used. Didn't have to be called. Now, I'm not saying Carpenter was not guilty, because, but there were other circumstances. I got started on that and I forgot to finish it. The other suspects. One was this Thomas Dukes, who was to be married to Zura at the end of October. One was Dow Cubbage, who had worked for the Brainards. She was kind of tending to favor him more than Dukes. And she was sending letters to him out in Kansas because he had already gone on to Kansas. And he never got any of the letters, so he didn't know what was going on. And then there was a young guy out of Decatur, Bert Carter. And he worked as a newspaper seller at the depot there, selling newspapers to people as they got off the train or on the train. And he had spent a lot of time with Zura when she was over there. And she was living, when she was in Decatur, she would stay with a lady also named Carpenter, but not related to the suspect. And it was soon found out that she was a madam. So it's hard to tell whether she recruited Zura and caused that problem, or how that worked. But then it could have been, they even suspected the bus driver that brought her from the depot to the hotel. So we have all of that going on, and Carpenter said, I'll make my own decision as what I do in the future. But one of the other resolutions was, if you stay, we're going to make sure that no farmer in this county brings their grain to your elevator. Well, that means his partner, Aurelian Eston, would be going out of business as well, would be ruined. So he didn't want that to happen because they were boyhood friends. They had businesses in Atlanta and Hartsburg and Lincoln. He didn't want his good friend, and this friend was a good friend. Every day of the trial, he sat with Orrin at the defense table through the whole trial. So they were pretty close. And Eston never ever thought that Orrin Carpenter could do this. And there were a lot of friends like that. Wasn't his minister though. So Carpenter's decision was to leave. He sold off all of his properties, as many as he could, and even bought the last farm ground that he got. He let go, he signed over to Beach and Hodman as part payment for, because it wiped him out. He probably spent $25,000 in 1883 dollars to do that. That's equal to millions of dollars nowadays. So his wealth was gone. The state or the county probably spent another $10,000 on their part of it. But he did have to come back, and they moved to Blunt, Dakota, because there were good friends out there. When they got there, they were glad-handed and patted on the back and taken care of like good friends do. They eventually settled in Sioux Falls, around Sioux Falls. They had a farm there at Sioux Falls. So they moved to Dakota. He did make it back in December of '84 to finish up some business. He was sitting with Uriah Hill, who was another undertaker in town, and they were chatting. They had been good friends, and Uriah was sitting at a desk like Diane here. The carpenter was on the other side, and this Mr. Burns had been told that, hey, he's in town. Now's your chance. So he walked past the window, saw that carpenter was in there, walked back, came back again, and had a gun. And he aimed at Carpenter, and you know, Hill's right in the line of fire too. He could just as easily get hit. So Burns shoots, the bullet hits the iron facade. It's one of those iron front buildings. It bounces off. You know, it doesn't even touch the glass. But he runs off and tells people down the street, I just killed Carpenter. Then he disappears.
Good.
And the police don't even try to catch him.
That's the father of the dead girl.
That's the father. So Carpenter finished up his business that day, went back to Dakota, didn't come back to Lincoln for another 25 years. 1909 he visited, and there was not an incident, nobody remembered. So, but he had to go through all that. Is he guilty? I don't know. I'm seeing the same evidence all those jurors saw, and I can't make a decision on it. But he stuck out like a sore thumb for being a friend of this girl. And maybe he's guilty. I don't know. Now, I said that, or maybe I didn't say, that this case was famous from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. People followed it the whole way through. I was disappointed in the local papers covering the trial in Petersburg. It was just very sketchy. You just didn't get much detail. So I went to newspapers.com and I put in Zura Burns to see which of the local papers might have done a good job. And the Decatur Herald Review did an excellent job of covering that case, that trial. And they didn't leave out any details. Now there were 4 publications that I went through all that. 4 publications that came out after this incident. The first came out in 1884. This Charles James was from Lincoln, and he wrote this book, Zura Burns or the Fatal Step, and it was a novel. Apparently he didn't worry about details like facts and things like that. But it was called a lurid novel. I've not seen a copy of that. I don't know if the library has a copy of it or not, but I don't see it posted anywhere for sale. This one was from 1990, and this Beverly Smith was a law professor at Illinois State University, and she did this for a some publication that dealt with 19th century crimes. But she is the one, this is the article where I found out about the 38 murders, only one conviction. And it was also where she saw the pressure from the community to make sure somebody was convicted for this. The next one, you'll probably recognize the name of the author, William Kruger.
Oh,
Does anybody know William Kruger?
yeah.
Yeah, I figured Joanne would. He was a police detective on Lincoln Police Force until 1980 when he retired. And then he became a police chief. Can't come up with the name of the town right now, but it's on that page right there. He also wrote about the Schmerker murders.
Oh, yeah.
When I started reading it, I got through about the first 50 pages, and he stayed pretty close to the story as I found it in the papers. But as he got farther in, he used the right names for the Burns family, he used the right names for the Carpenter family, but then when he got beyond that, he started using pseudonyms for other characters that showed up.
To protect.
And I was reading that, and I said, boy, this is going to confuse me when I get to speaking about this, because I'm going to have two names to call these people, and I'm going to get confused. So I haven't finished reading it yet. I did order a copy. It's still online. So I ordered that, and it came last week. And now, one thing I did notice, if that's supposed to be a picture of Zura, it's not indicated in the book anywhere. I usually give credits for photographs and who it is and where it came from.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing like that in there. So it may just be a picture of a girl. So we have that one. That one came out in 2004. This one is a blog for 19th century crimes and murders. This guy, Robert Wilhelm, manages it. He did this piece on for his blog. He's got several of the stories up. But this one, he condensed everything into 3 pages. So he missed a few things. And the few things that he did get were inaccurate. So it's a story, and that's what he does, is he writes stories, but it's not based on anything. And I looked at the list of sources he had, and they were all papers from back east.
Oh, no.
So it was their, second, third, fourth telling of the story. And you can see in the title already, he's already made the first mistake, calling her Zora. Well, that was interchangeable, but the closer you got to Logan County, it was Zura. The farther you got away from Logan County, it was Zora. And he was a long way from Logan County. But I just discounted that one as being accurate for anything.
Is that Kruger related to Kruger Elevator?
No, that I wouldn't know. Wouldn't know. I don't know that family history there. Questions?
Yeah.
Who did it?
What's that?
That's the suspense we are all gonna carry home with us tonight.
When you had that picture of the elevator just right out here,
Uh-huh.
would the train be on the other side of that?
Other side of it,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I knew the train was,
The streets were much narrower then,
okay,
so that's why it looks like there's so
Yeah.
much space between
yeah,
Chicago
Okay.
Street and the tracks.
gotcha.
How far down Ninth Street was this?
I was gonna look that up, but I couldn't find a city directory from that year of 1882. I went to the library and it was the 1870s, and they didn't live on Ninth Street in the 1870s.
No, my house is 1889 or something, 1890.
Yeah, it jumps up like 86, so they were gone by then. Gary,
Is she buried around here?
no, they took her back to St. Elmo, and she's buried down there. Other questions?
No murder weapon found.
No murder. No, here's another thing. She wore a white hat that night. She was seen leaving the hotel with a white hat. She had a gossamer, whatever that is, a boa or something to go around your neck. I don't know what a gossamer is.
Like that.
It was all gone.
And she had a valise with her. None of that stuff was ever found.
Whoa.
They searched the elevator furnace to see if any ashes from all that stuff was there. Nothing. They searched the furnace in the Carpenter house. Nothing. They seined Kickapoo Creek because he was going to cross Kickapoo Street going up to Hartsburg Monday morning. Didn't find a thing. They went on up to Sugar Creek because he was going to cross Sugar Creek. Nothing. They never found any of those items. So how could he have gotten rid of that? To me, the lack of blood evidence on him or his buggy, he's got to have walked in it. There's no way you can do that and not walk in it and get it on your boots and shoes and carry it to your buggy. There's no way to do that. So
Done a DNA evidence
And
on
they-
the fetus.
had blacksmiths look at his buggy, and one of them found that the front wheels were just a little offset. So instead of leaving two tracks, because usually the second set of wheels follow the first set of wheels, and you have two tracks for a buggy. Well, his produced three tracks. But the buggy tracks out there didn't have that third track. They even took casts of the horseshoe prints out there to compare with his horse. Didn't match. So there was just a lot of stuff that says, no, he didn't there. He wasn't there. But maybe he was just good enough to cover up all that stuff. But in the short period of time he had, because we know he was home by 10 o'clock on Saturday night or Sunday night, and gone to Hartsburg by the time the body was found Monday morning. And she was killed between midnight and 3, and he was supposed to get back in the house and be able to get up at the regular time on Monday without his family knowing. It just, that part just didn't fit for me.
He's a pretty big businessman in town. Did he have a lot of enemies in town? That,
That's possible. He ended up having a lot of enemies.
yeah.
His family could have lied too.
Pardon?
His family could have supported him and lied.
But they
That's always a
had
possibility.
testified so many times though. You would think there would have been a mistake somewhere.
Did they not even consider any of the other people that might have been suspect? Or I know they wanted a scapegoat, it sounds
They
like.
tried to
But did
I
they,
think it was somebody completely outside the picture.
but they didn't.
If she
go
was
there at all.
trying to get if she was trying to get an abortion, and she was to meet somebody, because she left the hotel in the afternoon on Saturday, and was the last time that they saw her. And she took all of her stuff with her. So by the time she was found, you know, there's just not enough time for Carpenter to have done all that stuff. Or it seems to me.
All right, it's a father.
I've
of a
never
baby.
been on a murder trial
think it was
jury,
the
so I have no idea how
I think it was a boyfriend. He
Bill,
was
you got a
so.
question?
they wouldn't even let me on the DUI.
It might have been him.
Father of the baby.
Oh yeah, we got a policeman in there.
You've never mentioned anything about a motive. And really, the only person that had a motive was the boyfriend.
Exactly.
Mhm.
That's what I
You
said.
haven't met.
Or the father of that baby.
The father of the baby,
Yeah, father of the baby.
you know.
Or whether there was another.
But
I think there was somebody else.
I think it was somebody else.
The boyfriend got mad, plus she worked at the madam's house
Mhm.
and all that, that would drive somebody.
Yeah.
Did she work there on purpose or was it?
There's an assumption she was working at the man's house, she was staying there, but that wasn't.
Whatever happened to her boyfriend?
She was working.
Don't know.
I don't know.
Were you here?
Yeah, which
Oh, right.
wasn't too bad.
They were engaged.
They were engaged. Oh, he was taken up with some other girl by that time too.
Ah.
So that's what his alibi was, that he was with her in Indiana, where he lived.
Shame.
John,
You said that there was 3 killed at Mount Pulaski
yes.
in the same manner,
Mm-hmm.
and they were quite a few years before they figured out who did it.
Well, it was 2 years.
And what,
It was the brother-in-law of the farmer, his sister's husband.
Probably more
And
knives
that-
back then than
That
guns.
farmer had gotten a check that day of $1,200 and took it to the bank, and somebody thought that he had cashed it and had that much money there. But he only kept $200 and put the rest of it in an account at the bank. So they didn't get their $1,200 and killed 3 people. Yes, sir. Sorry.
I'm gonna follow her lead. Can't the county exhume her body and check for DNA evidence?
That would be something, but
Is she buried around here?
they had no evidence. That's the problem.
St. Elmo.
Oh, she's in St. Elmo. Yeah, it would have to
Is
be,
she buried locally?
no, St. Elmo is southern Illinois.
Exhume it anyway.
Yeah.
Was there any other that type of murders after this in the county?
Oh, I'm sure.
There wasn't nothing registered?
1976 was awfully busy. I remember that one.
Oh, yeah.
There wasn't nothing-
Talking about 76.
2 triple murders.
Every murder around.
Probably more than triple on
They said
that.
if you wanna get.
So-
Well, yeah, but I mean with throat cuts and all that.
Well, that, I didn't have that information.
My parents
Yes, I
live
knew
right
that
now.
at the time.
My parents live right next to her.
Anybody else? Questions?
Yes, I knew that.
Otherwise, we'll go back and get our,
So Carpenter's house doesn't exist anymore?
pardon?
Carpenter's house doesn't exist to this day?
I don't know. I couldn't find where they lived on 9th Street. But they lived somewhere else in the 1870s, and then I'm losing my voice. I haven't talked this much this loud for a long time.
Right down the street from us.
Anybody else?
Very well
Oh,
done,
boy.
Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Very good.
Well, I'm going to try to put together a video on this, but my camera went off again, so I might have some good pictures later on.
And I have